Happy Pride, everyone. Welcome to Table Talk. Whether you're here with us on Zoom, Facebook Live, or Clubhouse, my name is Andy Engel. I'm Senior Programmer at Reimagine. For anyone who needs a visual description, I'm a white cisgender male, glasses, grayish hair, blue striped shirt, and behind me there's a banner with a logo of Reimagine, which is like an open window or an open door. Tonight's table talk is entitled Ballroom Has Something to Say About Art, Justice, and Healing. It's the final table talk in a three-part series by and for LGBTQ plus communities. We began the series focusing on home, specifically reimagining LGBTQ plus affordable housing. Last week, our focus was on grief and spirituality, specifically the LGBTQ plus Puerto Rican experience. My choice in putting these table talks together was to get specific because the LGBTQ plus community is overwhelmingly broad and diverse. Table Talk was born last summer as part of Reimagine's Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Initiative. That's JEDI for short. It's a series of honest, lively, and unscripted conversations by and for underrepresented communities. At the same time, everyone is invited to these spaces to witness, learn, and listen. Here's the central question that grounds Table Talk. What does it mean to live and die well, specifically among groups that have been historically marginalized, who experience disproportionate obstacles to healthy living and dignified dying? Our vision for Table Talk is that it becomes a regular booster shot of knowledge, empathy, cultural humility, and community. So far, we've had some powerful table talks led by Black communities and by Asian American folks. What I've been loving about this particular Table Talk series is that it complicates all of those neatly categorized and distinct communities. Yes, tonight is an LGBTQ plus table talk, and it's also a Black table talk, and it's also a Latinx table talk. And it's absolutely true that the House Ballroom community consists primarily of Black and Brown, transgender, and gender nonconforming folks, but there are numerous allies involved with the community who represent an abundance of races, ethnicities, genders, and sexual orientations. That's clear on tonight's panel. The joy in working on this LGBTQ plus series, a warm and yummy alphabet soup, is to witness all the intersecting identities that feed into queer lives. TV shows like Pose and the film Paris is Burning introduce Ballroom to a wider audience, but I've learned so much more after meeting tonight's speakers, taking the time to listen and reading what they have to say. You will too. Thank you to our 2021 sponsors at Reimagine. We cannot do this work without you. I want to especially highlight the John and Wowna Harmon Foundation for their support of Reimagine's JEDI initiative, which makes Table Talk possible. And I also want to thank the primary co-host of this series, SAGE, an organization that collaborated with Reimagine on its in-person festival back in 2018. They serve LGBTQ plus older adults across the US and Puerto Rico. And also shout outs to BAD in the Bronx, HEAT in Brooklyn, House Lives Matter, and the Ballroom Freedom School Project, who are co-hosting this table talk, as well as Brick TV for their media partnership. Thank you. And I also want to acknowledge a special guest in our Zoom room tonight. It is artist Lawrence Lindell. Lawrence, would you mind waving hello to the folks? Thank you. He will be drawing some comics tonight based on this conversation. His camera won't be on, but we hope to be sharing out this artwork in the future. And also thanks to Reimagine's all queer production team on this table talk, Zubin Desai and Misha Jain. Now I am going to launch a quick poll. Let's see. Okay, I'd love to get your response to this. Do you feel comfortable or confident having conversations with loved ones about what it means to live and die well? Thank you. We'll be doing another poll at the end of this table talk, about 7 other questions. So I really appreciate getting this information from you. You all know data is so important. Okay, here we go. Very interesting. Okay. Okay. Now, our speakers tonight all have something to say about Ballroom. Their impressive bios are on Reimagine's event listing. I encourage you to take a look at those. I want to extend my gratitude to Dr. Marlon Bailey, Dr. Ayana Christian, Benji Hart, Jennifer Lee, and Robert Sember. You are a dream team. And the captain who brought all of you together is Michael Robertson. I call him Archangel Michael. I thought I was so original, but then he told me that, Dr. Christian, you call him that too. Oh well. He always wishes me God morning in emails and texts. He is a person of faith. He's a polymath, like all of our speakers tonight. The hats he wears include father, scholar, artist, public health educator, and advocate. Michael, thank you for your trust in Reimagine and for being our ambassador to the House Ballroom community. Michael asked that we show some videos before we start, and then he will get going and you'll get to learn more about these folks. The videos are about 6 minutes long in total, so we can get started with those.
There'll be peace in the valley for me someday. There'll be peace in the valley, Lord, for me. Oh, yes. There'll be no sorrows, no sadness, Lord, no troubles will be. There'll be peace in the valley for me.
That I heard of once in a somewhere over the rainbow skies. like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you'll someday I wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where troubles melt like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me somewhere over the rainbow. Skies are blue and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true.
Hello, everybody. Michael is having some technical difficulties at the moment. I sent him the call-in number. So while he's trying to get in that way, Robert, may I ask you to just kick us off?
Certainly, Andy. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. So maybe we can just do a very quick round of introductions. The folks who are gathered here for the conversation. I'm Robert Sember. I have been involved with the ballroom scene for over 25 years and had the great honor of collaborating with the late Abid Santana Evisu on the creation of the Ballroom Freedom School. I'm gonna pass it over to Dr. Elliott. Ayana, do you wanna just say hi and maybe where you're from and a little something?
Yeah, so I'm Ayana Christian is my alias, and I am a native of Washington, D.C. I currently live and work in Los Angeles, California. I'm a nurse practitioner by background, and my specialty of focus is care of gender and sexual minorities, particularly racial and ethnic people by background.
Thanks, Ayana. Dr. Marlon Bailey, we're going to go next.
Hi, everybody. Dr. Marlon M. Bailey. I am born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, and I have been a part of the ballroom scene and the community and have conducted substantial research for 15 plus years on the ballroom community. I've written a book on the ballroom community, shameless plug, it's here. I'm an associate professor of women and gender studies and African American studies in the School of Social Transformation at Arizona State University.
Thanks, Marlon. So good to see you. Benji.
Hello, everyone. My name is Benji Hart. I'm originally from Massachusetts, but I'm currently Chicago-based, which is to say, to do my own little land acknowledgement, calling from unceded, occupied Potawatomi, Ojibwe, Miami, and Ho-Chunk territory, among many others. I started voguing when I was 16 and joined the House of Ninja when I was 18. And so have been involved in the ballroom scene primarily as a voguer for the last 15 or so years. And I'm also a police and prison abolitionist and do a lot of work around police and prison abolition. And quick image description, I'm a light-skinned Black femme. I have a little blowout, some facial hair. I'm wearing a aquamarine shirt, and I have some posters on the wall. I'm calling from my living room. And I have some posters on the wall behind me, including one poster that says Black Trans Lives Matter.
Thanks so much, Benji. And I'll hand it over to you, Dr. Jennifer Lee.
Good evening, everyone. It's so great to share space with so many amazing colleagues, friends, and family tonight. I am part of Ballroom in a very different way, as a community organizer and advocate and educator, starting House Lives Matter in about like 2015, but I've been a part of the community since about 2012. Really working with the Kiki scene, which is like the younger version of the community, if you will. And yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of research in, not a lot, but I've done some research with the house and ballroom community, looking at leadership and how it is a huge part of the ballroom community in terms of alternative kinship and how we organize and survive and sustain our lives and really contend the status quo. Yeah, so that's a little bit about me. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So I am definitely not going to be able to channel Michael Robeson, but maybe I can, just off the top of my head, begin to formulate a question that will begin this dialogue for ourselves. And maybe we can begin by thinking through this moment and what ballroom and the histories and the work and our relationships with ballroom might illuminate about this very critical conjunction that we have been at over the past sort of 15 to 18 months between this pandemic that has illuminated yet again the profound structures of inequality and social violence that are part of the social underpinnings of this crisis, and then the extraordinary national and international response to the murder of George Floyd. How, from your perspective, do we begin to illuminate this conjunction from within the history of ballroom? I'm thinking of one of the questions that I was asked very early on in the COVID pandemic, which is, what can we learn or what can we carry forward from the HIV epidemic that in some way might illuminate or show us a path forward? At that same conjunction, just touching on what you, Jennifer, have shared with us, what can we learn about community and kinship from within the ballroom scene that might speak in some way to the incredible violence that has sort of shaped the context that we've been working in for so long? And Marlon, maybe I can start with you. I saw you sort of nodding in acknowledgement of that resonance between COVID and HIV.
Yeah, thank you for that's an incredible question. It's so important. And I think one of the things that we had to confront or are having to confront with the COVID-19 pandemic and HIV, which is ongoing, is the notion of the experience of isolation and exclusion from our families and communities of origin, and the disproportionate susceptibility and vulnerability that we have to the HIV/AIDS epidemic, pandemic, and the COVID-19 pandemic. And also what gets illuminated and what is exposed is the intersecting structural vulnerabilities, such as lack of quality and inclusive healthcare, both prevention and treatment, lack of stable housing, lack of community inclusion in terms of our communities of origin, also lack of mental health care, different disproportionate susceptibility to substance abuse disorders, and also violence, both inflicted by state and non-state actors. So what Ballroom has taught us, on the one hand, it has our existence, our durability, our lives have, on the one hand, exposed how we are disproportionately vulnerable to all of these different kinds of structural inequalities and structural violence. On the other hand, and I think this is to your question and what the work that we still have yet to do in terms of translating the ingenious nature of ballroom culture to create alternative ways of living, ways of thinking and viewing the world, and ways of experiencing each other, and ways of surviving the multiplicitous nature of our structural exclusion and violence subjected upon our bodies. That we are an ingenious community, and for my purposes, we are a model. Because one of the things that we know is that Black and Brown LGBTQ plus populations have always had to come up with alternatives to dominant formations such as family, community, structures, institutions. We've always had to come up with alternative formations in order to survive. But also there's a way in which we have to think about beyond survival, but thriving. I would say that at the end of the day, what Ballroom brings us to is the notion of living is about living with each other. Living is about loving each other. Living is about embracing our contradictions and loving each other and ourselves anyway. Living is about self-reliance, meaning community reliance, not the whole conservative neoliberal self-reliance, but the community reliance, the reliance on the ability to look to our sister, our brothers, our kin, who are not our kin necessarily from biology or notions of, or families, communities of origin, but because of shared experience, affinity, and a commitment to not only the ballroom community and this project, this life project, but a commitment to each other interpersonally in terms of family, and the ability to express that commitment, express that thriving, express that experience at balls. At balls. So it's not just about, the shared familial activities that we participate in, but it's also how we demonstrate our essence, how we create a new world. We create different forms of recognition. We create different ways of having relationships to institutions that we create, that we build ourselves. So that's not to say that ballroom is a panacea. That's not to say that ballroom is perfect. That's not to say that ballroom doesn't have its own internal violences that it inflicts upon each other. What I am saying is that ballroom represents the possibilities. It represents the possibilities when it doesn't seem like that there are any possibilities. And it also helps us understand that the possibilities are not just material possibilities. Possibilities are spiritual, they're experiential, they're familial, they're kinship possibilities, and they're love possibilities.
Thank you so much. That was really extraordinary. Marlon, you've just like opened up territories of conversation and dialogue, really remarkable. One of the things that Michael and I will often sort of share with each other is, we term it this way: ballroom invites the problematic. And this is just to pick up on one of the points that you made, which is that there can be from the outside a kind of deep romance about the ballroom community. In many ways, a lot of the sort of consumption of ballroom that we've seen over the past few years, this sort of deep process of commodification of ballroom culture, has been in a way stimulated by a certain sort of romance. And part of what that does is it elides the very profound and deep generational wrestles with the problematics that are part of what ballroom grapples with. In that sort of sense, it is deeply connected with the world. There is in this romance a kind of further sort of isolation of ballroom in a certain sense. The love, in fact, is, or that form of a kind of obsession with ballroom becomes a further isolating factor. And so we've got this sort of deep internal work that ballroom has been doing, but that internal work also points to or illuminates the contradictions in the larger society. And I would wonder if I could pass it over to you, Benji, at this point, to maybe want to sort of name or identify what some of those really generative or essential or urgent contradictions are. I've been thinking a lot about the word crisis. And that the sort of deep etymology of that word is a medical term. It means that point in illness where a patient might in fact begin to get better or will begin to get worse. It's a very profound and difficult moment of sort of patience, of deep observation, of waiting to see what turn is going to be taken. And so in this sort of state of crisis that we're in, where we're in this deep active process of working to perhaps nudge the turn. And so Benji, I'm passing it to you in part because of this long, deep commitment you've had to abolition, that you are positioned within ballroom and also see this connection with other struggles and other urgencies.
Oh, thank you so much. And yeah, I'm just like really buzzing from the beautiful things that Marlon shared and that Marlon said. I think one of the words that Marlon said that stuck out to me and resonated with me is contradiction. And the literally innumerable contradictions that ballroom is constantly straddling, is historically straddling, and the ways that ballroom, I think for me, the most complicated thing about ballroom is it's always both critiquing these structures of power that have historically locked out Black and brown and trans and queer and poor and working people, and also aspiring to them at other moments or sometimes even within the same moment, and seeking entrance and seeking validation at the same time that it's rejecting and at the same time that it's critiquing. And I think when I was a younger person, that contradiction really bugged me, where I kind of felt like, why are we trying to seek entrance? Why are we trying? Why do we want this validation? Like, we don't need it. It's not necessary. And I think as I've gotten older, and I think also as I've grown to see ballroom not as something that stands on its own, but something that's deeply connected to centuries-long traditions of Black creative struggle and Black movement and Black survival, that's to me is like such a quintessential part of Blackness, but also of Black creative genius, is straddling contradiction and actually not rejecting it, but diving into it, and accepting the tension as the exact source of creative generation. That it's like actually the tension and actually the contradiction that often sparks the most powerful and the most resonant creations. And like Ballroom is one of those creations, Vogue is one of those creations, and so many other things that we could name. So I think there's deep ancestral wisdom actually in the ways that Ballroom is constantly taking toxic materials and imagining liberation with them. I think there's ancestral wisdom in the ways that Ballroom is asking us to grapple with something more complicated than this is good or this is bad or this is right or this is wrong or this is oppressive or this is liberatory. So much it's actually both at the same time. And it forces us to reevaluate exactly what Marlon was again pointing to, like what is the world that we're trying to create? And Ballroom is, I think Ballroom does this incredible dance of straddling contradictions in ways that also is generative of a new world, but in the current, within the current world, within the current moment that we're inhabiting, helping us imagine Black liberation, trans liberation, the liberation of so many different kinds of oppressed communities and marginalized, targeted experiences that all find home in one way or another in the ballroom scene. I think Ballroom is constantly doing this collective work of imagining what liberation is, even when that liberation, I think in fact it's even instructive that the liberation we often imagine is still oppressive in some ways. I think it's actually illuminating that each new iteration of liberation that we imagine actually still holds contradiction, actually still holds seeds of oppression from the previous iteration. And elders and young folks, you know, young folks or younger generations of folks entering into the ballroom scene alike are constantly breaking out of the old shell and creating a new one, breaking from the old skin and creating a new one, which I think the Kiki scene is actually a really like important and powerful example of that. But also how that process is just kind of unending and how that process is actually kind of ceaseless. And just when you think you have the answer, or just when you think like, this is what liberation is, this is what freedom is, this is what a better world is, a new contradiction emerges and a new question has to be answered about, well, what about this? But we left out this, but we forgot about this. But with the creation of this new thing, we've also created a new problem. And just the constant work of liberation, the ongoing and the never-ending work of liberation, I think Ballroom kind of puts that, it kind of puts that into poetry. It puts that into like real and enacted and demonstrated like concrete reality with Vogue, with so many of the other practices inside of Ballroom. And that's what came up for me when I was listening to Marlon talk, as well as in response to your question, Robert.
Thanks so much, Benji. So I'm going to pass it over to Ayana, and then Michael is on the phone, and so Michael will be able to join us. But Ayana, I want to pick up on this sort of note that both Marlon and Benji have underscored, which is this idea of world making. That there is this this reaching forward that is part of Ballroom, that is rooted very much in the kind of lived experience. And in many ways, this is a community that has experienced incredible violence, extraordinary death. In fact, this past year has included the violent deaths of a number of very beloved members of our community. And so there is this deep-lived collective familiarity with trauma. And so I'm wondering, Ayana, if you might want to just begin to open up for us this dialogue, that how you see this dialogue within the ballroom scene, and perhaps within your own practice and your own experience, between trauma and this idea of the promise of the future, of hope. How do you see those two things moving through the everyday lives of our community?
Yeah, thank you. I throw out the word survivorless or survivorless. In having Dr. Bailey talk and then Benji, it evoked a lot of feeling and emotion. Michael always does it when he opens up, a project, a presentation, something that he shows a video and he asks of the audience, what did you see? What did you hear? What did you feel? And this is a new one. And I do these things with Michael many times. And this is a new video set that he showed. And it evoked even more emotion because sometimes I don't think we recognize or realize some of those heroes that we've lost over time. I'm so privileged, I didn't mention this in my introduction, to have been involved with the ballroom scene for 26 years now and have known many those people that were shown in the videos. And I can't believe it that I've been around that long to have been acquainted with so many of those wonderful souls that in my existence in ballroom, having the privilege to be a house mother for 2 tenures, that when we think about sort of crisis, this community has lived through many crises. So as we look over the past year at COVID-19, this is not a new thing for us, right? So people are panicking and they're having this exuded amount of stress, but some of us have lived through this, particularly those who've lived through and have worked in the HIV/AIDS world, that we've seen people come and go. We've seen those who've been disproportionately impacted. We're seeing it again with COVID. COVID has opened our eyes up to this disproportionate impact of disease to one race or ethnicity or one economic sect of our population. But we've known that for a long time. Ballroom has done a huge sort of lift in bringing community to a place of resiliency. And that's why I say survivorless, because we've survived many of these things that were either set to put us down structurally or physically, bringing us together in this family unit that is not constructed of our biological or nuclear families, but of surrogate families, one that we choose. And that choice that we congeal with these other individuals who have had liked experiences, who have been through some of those traumas, who've been through some of those pains, have used each other to sort of lift and leap and get over and get forward. I can't think of a better example of how some of the people and the folks from yesterday that we saw in that video, understanding their stories, even if you didn't know them, if you just happened to be blessed enough to know their stories, that they inspire you to be a better person within community, that Ballroom allows you to demonstrate and sort of practice and rehearse that. It is how I see, the attributes of being able to move forward. And much of my lived experience has been an attribution of my ballroom experience, being a fortunate house mother, having that fortunate opportunity. And I say fortunate because it's a privilege. I'm not sure if those outside of the community understand when you are able to lead a group of people. Sometimes they don't always have like minds, but you definitely have some synergistic lived like experience that you can speak to, sort of what that person has gone through to help them, nudge and inform them. And they feel that you are a blueprint or a model for how it's supposed to be. the lessons in leading house, house organizations is sort of kind of linked to real world experience, that it translates, right? We can learn how to operate in our everyday lives. I for sure am, am a disciple of that. I'm a student of that, of how ballroom and house mothership and house membership has informed how I show up in places, both professionally and personally.
Thank you so much. So at this point, I'm just sort of looking at us on the screen here and the way in which we're sort of holding our position as somewhat as elders and as mentors, and you've just spoken to that in some way, but just this the multi-generational richness of ballroom and the movement of or the shaping that happens constantly over the life course is really something extraordinary. And so maybe, Michael, can we bring you in at this moment to perhaps sort of reflect on that relationship between past and future, that theological space as well, that is so deeply connected with this question of death and life and the specific ways in which ballroom holds those experiences. I hope that you are there with us.
Michael. I am there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I apologize. Me and technology, as I get older, I'm trying to be better friends with it. And so today it decided that it wanted to act up. But Robert, first of all, I want to express the sentiments that have been being shared. Marlon, as you've opened up the space, that point around the living beyond survival is so important. And Benji, you always sort of open up that space around this, for me, this interesting relationship between what me and Robert call the invitation of the problem. And Ayana, I utterly love you, and I've oftentimes said that you in of itself is an intravention word in many ways, and Marlon Bailey has made us know more so. But I want to read a quote real quick, Robert, if I can. It's by one of my favorite people, Cornel West. And I remember in the beginning of his book, The Black Prophetic Fire, he wrote, are we witnessing the death of Black prophetic fire in our time? Are experiencing the demise of Black prophetic tradition in present-day America? Are we experiencing that demise? Do the great prophetic figures and social movements no longer resonate in the depths of our souls? Have we forgotten how beautiful it is to be on fire for justice? And I thought about that particularly as we entered into this new year and the insurrection that happened at the Capitol in the middle of COVID at the height of George Floyd's death, and the re-energizing of Black Lives Matter, and these moments were all coming together. And a great colleague of mine named Dr. Jacqueline Lewis, who is she's a womanist scholar. She is the first woman and African American to be pastor of Middle Collegiate Church in their 300-year history. And she had asked, she did an annual conference, and she had to do it virtually last year. And she had asked me and Tyra Dominic Jackson to be as part of a dialogue around what Ballroom has to say. And I remember saying that I thought that this sort of the COVID pandemic has made us all take a global pause all at one time. And in this pause, it was asking us to sit with three propositions. One is a philosophical proposition, and that proposition is, who do we desire to be now? Right? So in this moment, we have the choice to choose who we're going to be and how we show up in the universe. The second one is a theological one. How do we desire to love and love more expansively? That in the work that we do, in the everyday lived experience that you invoice, Robert, that love, think about James Baldwin, has to be an ethic in the way that we do this work. And the third one is a political one. The thing that Marlon Bailey just said, how do we begin to move away from politicizing around the right not to die and move towards the right to live? For so long, as marginalized people, that has been our mantra or our trajectory, trying not to die, and forgot that we have the divine right to live. And so for me this year, I began to look at Ballroom a little different. Robert, you and I oftentimes use the term Ballroom has something to say, but begin to look at Ballroom as a Black prophetic fire, always as the Black church and the rebirth of a new nation. I'm thinking about something that Benji said about how ballroom has the ability to reimagine new moments, new ways, new modes of liberation. And I oftentimes have begun to say very differently that ballroom doesn't reimagine, it enacts in the everyday lived experience, and other people look at it and they imagine it because ballroom does it. Right? I'm going to say it again. The ballroom doesn't have a meeting and say, let's reimagine new ways of liberation. It enacts in its everyday lived experience to become liberatory for everyone else. And that becomes the imagination for other communities. And that to me is what it means that ballroom has something to say. And that's a couple of things I'll say about that, Robert. I have been blessed enough, like Ayana, to been in this community for 27 years, first in the Philadelphia community because I grew up in Camden, New Jersey, and then in New York City, and been blessed to be not only a parent in many houses and have created four, but also blessed enough to be able to create, let me say that differently, being blessed enough to be a vessel in which the universe created interventions through. And to Ayana's point, it is an absolute blessing. It's a privilege to be able to be used in this way, particularly when you have seen so much, so many folk that you have been so connected to who are no longer here under the guise of larger communities, and there have been no outcry. And if there's one thing that ballroom has taught the world over, this thing about what it means to be human and struggle for freedom in the face of catastrophe, is that even regardless of all of those things that we've been confronted with, somehow, some way, we continue to create new theological formulations around love, absolute love. And though, as folks who said before me, that we have done these things that appear to be contradictory to love, but it absolutely is not. But it is the very thing that has allowed us to be in dialectical tensions, to try to work it out, not necessarily feeling the need to reconcile, but the understanding that if you and I and your sister and your brother, that if we don't connect together, there is no longer a community. And that is the thing that I think that we lead with most and foremost.
Thanks, Michael. I just think, I've been sitting in my head sort of creating this kind of agenda of things to talk about, and I just lost track of it. And we just sort of note that I think all of us have been in the ballroom scene for a few decades. We are young, some of us are really young and amazing, but we are wise and elders. And Dr. Elliott, you hold that position for me in the most sort of remarkable way. So I so appreciate that. So maybe we can just dig a little bit into this, and then I'm going to open it up for us to maybe start to just identify what questions we want to work with a little bit. But Jennifer, this question of the politics of ballroom has something to say. That ballroom, in a certain sense, is we formulated, Abid and I, this notion of vogueology, which is this understanding of both a kind of investigation or inquiry into the terms of the ballroom scene itself, but that the ballroom scene had a kind of methodology for being able to examine the world and interpret the world at large, that there was a kind of epistemology, a knowledge base, and a praxis in ballroom that actually speaks to every crisis that you might need to address at a global level. And you came into the community with that vision as well, and have worked for a number of years now in really intentionally creating the space for that kind of deep praxis, that deep inquiry and action towards direct political transformation. And I wonder if you could share with us a little bit of that work, but also maybe, at this moment, what the agenda is, what we carry forward, and where you see the movement going.
Sure, thank you. Wow, just like so tough to follow everything I'm hearing, and it's like taking it all in and rethinking everything, even in the midst of how we plan House Lives Matter movements and liberation work. Um, Ballroom is just a testament to a different kind of power. And I'll start there because through all this crisis, catastrophe, in this time, we are truly in a renaissance where, as Benji talked about, this this reimagined new world. And after the Spanish flu was also the Renaissance in the Roaring 20s, where ballroom was formulated and was grown and birthed, right, is after such crisis. And so in this moment, I think we are in a true renaissance for House Lives Matter and for our community to demonstrate that testament of our power in terms of how we want to be liberated through all the contradictions, but understanding that we have the power to actually leave the world in a changed way. And watching those videos just made me think about all the legacies, the stories of the struggle, the freedom, the joy, and how we're walking in their shoes and their paths and continuing to, maybe walk to the beat of our own drum, but to understand that they have laid the foundation for us to be the new generation abolitionists to really abolish ICE, to abolish white supremacy, to abolish racism, to abolish like transphobia, homophobia, all of that. But one thing I will say is in this moment, I just really believe in what I've witnessed over this time, I want to say, in COVID is this power of Black trans power and Black trans people who have transformed my way of thinking and the way forward for our movements, because they've always been at the forefront of they are the most visionary progressive leaders, period, within social movements. And they are essential for our future, for creating our new future, reimagining our new future, because everything has failed them. And in that experience, they understand the link between Black civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, trans rights, and that is that crucial struggle for liberation that Black trans people experience. And that's why you saw during a global pandemic and the crisis catastrophe of it all, one of the largest protests that happened in the Brooklyn Liberation or Black Trans Lives Matter March with over 20,000 people. And if that didn't say something to all of us, it was to say like, Black trans women specifically are essential in creating this new future. And they were when they created the ballroom community, and they will continue to be as we move forward. And I think centering Black trans women and Black trans people and non-binary and gender non-conforming Black trans people is essential for our movement. And that's kind of where I'm going with House Lives Matter at this moment, realizing and recognizing their contributions and valuing them in ways that they have not been, because they're often invisibilized. They're often, it took George Floyd and then Tony McDade for a march like that to happen, but you saw how much power was behind that march. And Ballroom also with House Lives Matter in organizing and our politics, we did a mutual aid fund. We raised over $20,000 to reach over 200 people in Ballroom in the middle of the pandemic. We just continue to, garner resources and utilize Marlon, that cultural labor, and continue to defy social structures, political structures, all of it to get together and stand in the power that we are and have, believing in each other and our power, loving each other, but also realizing that the safest community is an organized one. And that's really where we stand right now. And that's where we're going to continue to go. And I think Audre Lorde said something, and I can't quote specifically, but it's like, you use the best of what you have right now for what is not yet then. And we are in this critical moment, and I think it's hard to explain where I'm going with it, because it's all in tension with each other. But what a beautiful stream for all these things to merge between anti-Blackness, anti-Asian racism. All these things are coming together to a tipping point where I think like there is a chance and a huge change happening, occurring, or will happen in this new renaissance that we will see and experience and witness in our lifetime in this moment. And I'll stop there for now. I don't know if I answered your question. I just went off.
Robert, can I jump into to something that my daughter, the beloved Dr. Jennifer Lee, just said, that she opened up? I think that was absolutely perfect in the way that you said that, Jennifer, because not only does Ballroom in many ways offer sort of this reimagination and liberation, but it offers a critique as well. And what do I mean by that, right? So that in the moment of George Floyd, not too far from that incident, a Black trans woman, Ayanna Dior, was beat, right, in a store, dragged out of the store. Somehow she had the historical wherewithal to pull herself back in the store so that she could be beat on camera, so it could be archived, so she could tell the world over that if I die, that folk will know this is something that happens to us all the time. It's so very, very in dialogue with Emmett Till's mother. Ballroom offers a critique because in this moment, this 40th anniversary of AIDS, as Jennifer said, we have lifted up and we needed to privilege the lives of Black and brown trans women. But one of the things we are no longer talking about is the increased transmission of HIV in terms of prevalence and incidence with young Black and Latino gay men, as if it's so essential that it become positive. And we're not having that dialogue. And so part of the critique is within a larger LGBT community, you want to talk about marriage equality, but how can we talk about that when all of these Black and Latino gay men are continuing to be becoming positive? How Black folk can talk about white supremacy and have a critique if they're not going to talk about Black homophobia. And to me, not only does Ballroom offer the sort of notion of reimagination, but it offers a critique, and it's in your face, it's an absolute notion of in your face. So I'll end with that.
So much, Michael. So I'm going to invite folks to maybe, if there is something that you want to just really guide us into opening up further that has already been said, please go for it. Dr. Elliott.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to what Dr. Bailey taught, and then Benji catapulted it, talking about the contradiction where a society says that, these people that we know and love are of no value. Some of the things that we find to be of coveted greatness have historically been deemed, sort of kind of on the outsets of promiscuous or whorish. I take, for example, imagery, pop culture, and its, in the robbery that has taken place from ballroom communities, everything from this community is desired, but the burden of this community. And I think Greg Tate in his book, when he talked about how white people have robbed Black culture for all of its epithets, but I think about how the oppression and the robbery persists within communities where Hollywood and pop culture have taken all of the ideas and the concepts from ballroom without reciprocity. And, now there may be currently some semblance of giving back, with the epilogue in the existence of Pose or the reality ballroom competition Legendary. But is this really a reciprocity of fair market value? Because the purse that is generated from them and the other ideas and concepts from ballroom that are taken are not really being paid back in accordance to their value to the community. And I just offer up, that into consideration as we talk about this contradiction of, wearing long hair and eyelashes and makeup. Those things from 2 decades ago were seen as the epithets of whores or prostitutes, and now everybody wants makeup, everybody wants long hair, everybody wants lashes, everybody wants body. And so this has been rich within our culture, and now it is spread out, and now it's okay, but it wasn't okay when we started it. Again, talking about that contradiction, and so how when you can use it to your benefit and to your riches or to your value, these were ideas from our community, and how can we, get some of that of our contribution back, where is the allegiance to our ideas and our concepts and what we offer up and we bring can we stop the stick up? This seems like a ongoing hold up, and being mindful that we're due something for what we contribute in this.
It's such a crucial and sort of formative contradiction. Marlon and Benji, do you want to pick this up? And
I think I might interject if that's okay. I love what Ayana had to say. And I love what everyone has had to say so far. I'm getting like chills over here from everything that everyone's sharing. But I think there's so many connections to make, but I think I hear in what Ayana is saying, I hear a conversation about reparations. I hear a conversation about how do we actually get resources to the communities that have given us this genius and that have given us these incredible art forms that the world has benefited from. People are now voguing in damn near every country. There are ballroom scenes on damn near every continent, and that doesn't just come from the US, that comes from Black folks, that comes from trans women of color, that comes from these incredibly marginalized communities within the US context. And so for me, when I hear, which I think is an incredibly important conversation about reparations, I hear the fundamental question of that being, how do we actually get resources to trans communities, to Black communities, to hood communities, to poor and working class people, and to all the folks that have given us these genius art forms. And I think that's actually such a crucial question, because I know for me, and Robert and I have talked a lot about this, Michael and I have talked a lot about this. I was very preoccupied as a young member of the ballroom scene and as a young voguer with cultural appropriation, and with straight folks, cis folks, non-Black folks, white folks, taking from the ballroom scene without giving back to it. And very much my initial preoccupation was sort of about with who could and could not participate, and who had the right to vogue and who didn't, and who had the right to claim ballroom and who didn't. And it took me a long time and a lot of pushing from other folks in my community, and a lot of folks pointing to those contradictions, frankly, in myself, to be like, is this actually about who can and can't vogue, or is it about how we honor the lives of the people who gave us vogue? Is it about policing and controlling who can and can't participate, or is it about asking deeper questions about how do we actually give real respect and real homage to the folks who passed this art form on to us? And I agree with Ayana that the notoriety and the big TV show lineups and things like that is really giving resources to the folks who own those networks and the folks who own the rights to those those shows. It's not, it's cute for the girls who get the coin, but even the girls who are getting the coin, even the actors on those shows aren't getting paid what they deserve to get paid, which means the folks who inspired those shows but who didn't make it to that level are certainly not getting paid what they deserve to get paid. And so for me, this connects deeply to Black Lives Matter, and this connects deeply to police and prison abolition, because for me, it's fundamentally a question about actually changing the structures of our society in ways that actually invest in Black communities, actually invest in trans communities, actually invest in immigrant communities, in poor and working class communities, and in the folks who have given us these incredible art forms that have traveled so far and given us so much power. And I think for me, that's actually a much more radical question. But again, where I was at before versus where I'm at now, I think the question of how do we actually redistribute resources is actually leads us to much more radical conclusions and leads our communities to make much more radical demands. because it's not just about policing who can and can't participate or who doesn't have the right. It's about actually demanding, if you really love these Black art forms, then you need to love Black people. And if you really love these trans art forms and you're really living for the girls and their style, then you need to give the girls their roses while they're here. And that requires so much more than just putting one person on a TV show or putting one person on a talk show. It requires actually changing the ways that we invest in oppressed communities. And that I'm gonna leave it there because I could take that in a whole bunch of other directions, and I'm gonna pause so other people can talk.
I just, if I could,
Can I just,
okay.
Monica, can I just do a quick bridge to a contradiction that you raised in your opening comment that I think is very relevant to what Benji has said now, which is this notion somehow that the creative act is an individual act. Whereas in fact, we need to understand it as this kind of, it's founded within, it comes from within the collective. So one of the contradictions that we're seeing, and I think, Benji, you and I have talked about this, the sort of radical anti-capitalist transformation that we need in a certain sense, is around this question of who owns authorship. How do you, and you see in these cultural processes, the extraction from what is really a collective creation, the extraction of an individualized authorship that then can be monetized and circulated and so forth. I also just want to signal that we're beginning to see a lot of really strong questions coming from the folks who are with us as well. So we want to have some time to do that. So Manan, I'm going to pass it on to you because I know you're going to have some really deep things to say about this conversation.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a brief point that this dovetails off of what Dr. Christian and Benji said. And it also goes back to something that Benji said a while ago. So I've struggled with this whole appropriation and cultural appropriation. And in the epilogue of my book, I exposed my internal struggle, and I came down on the side of what culture actually does. And there's a contradiction with culture. There's a conundrum with culture, that culture is something that is always in formation, that no one individual owns culture, but culture has the ability to transform institutions, lives, communities, a whole landscape. And most importantly, and that's the point that I want to make, that it also transforms people's way of thinking and ways of knowing and their relationship to themselves. So there's an unfortunate and there's a kind of benefit, I guess, or an unfortunate and attribute to that we can talk about this problem with that Ballroom is situated in. On the one hand, even though Ballroom is always recreating, reimagining in itself, producing new ways of knowing, new ways of living and being, even when institutions and in this capitalist society captures it, takes it up and monetizes it and uses it, Ballroom is creating some different shit. It's like, yeah, child, that tea is old. We gonna move on to this over here. And so in a way, the society is always sort of behind the 8 ball, but it catches up because capitalism will have its profits. It will it will consume. But on the other hand, then this is where I think that we might want to lean more on this, and that is that, and this gets back to what Benji said earlier, contradictions and contestation. That it is Ballroom's creation of both the contradiction and the contestation of gender, for example, that has, and not just Ballroom, but those who have come before Ballroom, those ancestors, those Ballroom ancestors, those Black and brown LGBTQ plus ancestors, have put on the table that gender is contested, It is something that is not inherent. It is something that is remade. It is something that is created. It is something that is imposed, but it is contested. Sexuality is contested. And what Benji pointed out is that that space of the contestation, the space of the contradiction and the contestation, that we can imagine new ways of being, therefore imagining a different relationship to gender, both as an individual, collective construct, but also as its institutional life, right? Ballroom has been essential in actually advancing this notion that gender is contested. I tell my students that Ballroom has taught me more about gender than Judith Butler. If Judith Butler takes what Ballroom does and translates it into the academy, but it's Ballroom that has created the knowledge. Ballroom has created the contestation. And so there are ways in which people who are even consuming Pose and Legendary and these, these shows, and also people who are participating, who are observing and consuming Ballroom. For many, it is the first time that they understand their own relationship to gender.
Yeah.
The first time they understand that their own relationship to gender is a contested relationship. It is not settled. It is one where the possibilities of transformation or changing or disrupting or getting rid of gender as a salient category, as a category of social inequality, as a category of violence. It is those folks, straight folks, cisgender folk who's like, wow, gender is this contested thing. It's not a settled thing. And it's Ballroom that has created that possibility. And so for me, that helps a little bit, that helps to mitigate my struggles with appropriation and consumption. But I think that that's where I'd like for us to look at as another possibility that Ballroom presents.
Well, and can I say this real quick? It is what both Marlon and Benji said, but Marlon, what you just said is why I call Ballroom a prophetic fire, because in many ways, absolutely, this Ballroom is leading forward this contestation of gender, but it doesn't do it to contest. It does out of its lived experience, and it becomes a contestation. So this is my point around Ballroom enacts. And other people look at the enactment and call it a reimagination. That's not what Ballroom does. It doesn't get into a room and have a meeting and say, we want to reimagine new ways of being. It doesn't do that. It enacts. It lives. And through that lived experience, it becomes reimagination for everyone else. And that is what it means to be a prophetic fire.
It's one of the reasons why we're seeing so many this coordinated series of legislations that are intended to try and shut down transgender lives. This is a signal of that contestation. So I want to go to a question that we've received, which Michael, I'm going to ask you to take up this question first. It's a very Michael question, I think. This is from Charlotte. Are there any funeral ceremonies that have been cultivated and upheld within the community?
Are there any funeral
ceremonies? So I imagine rites or rituals or practices of carrying those who have passed.
So wonderful that we are in this moment again, as Andy opened us up around this 40th anniversary of sort of the first communication around this rare cancer, now that which we call AIDS. And I think about, and Robert, you know this absolutely well, and so do you, Marlon, because we lived through that experience, the sort of the Ronald Reagan administration and his neoliberal politics, right? And him, of course, cutting social programs. And at the moment of the crisis of AIDS, he spoke, but only once, and very softly around AIDS. And so we talk about Trump having no national strategy around COVID for a year. The Reagan administration had none around AIDS for 7 years. And then that crack emerges in 1984, and the Black community made a political and intentional decision to deal with crack. And one of his assertions was that if Black gay men were getting AIDS, that Black gay men deserved it. It was God's way of getting rid of perversion from the earth, and it was Black gay men's punishment. So as Black gay men began to organize in a certain kind of way, particularly around 1986, as the formation of organizations like GMAD and NMAC and other countries were created, one of the things it did as it critiqued white gay men and not in engaging in our issues, it intentionally left out the house ball community. And part of it is through the sort of classist lens. The ballroom community, in many ways, I think about Kathy Cohen's notion of boundaries of blackness, were not worthy to be saved. So here is ballroom, both being impacted by crack and AIDS at the same time. In 1986, it migrates out of New York City as a community to Washington, D.C. in 1989, to Philadelphia in 1990 to Baltimore. So impacted. The convergent convener both for these sort of twin epidemics at the same time. And what we would continue to see was death after death after death, but no organization advocating on its own behalf, right? Families not necessarily want to deal with folks who were impacted and died, and so we had to do for our own. And so what you began to see was not necessarily ceremonial or ritual in a particular kind of way, but the ritual having to take care of oneself, having to raise monies for memorial services, right? Having to be the one who went to the hospital to take care of children because families would not, and the larger communities turned a blind eye. And of course, we know that in the mid-90s, as other interventions were created, we saw less numbers of people dying. But around 2007, we began to see a trend. I remember the late 2006, a young man named Lorenzo from the house of goddammit wind up dead in his apartment. And 2 months later, one of the icons now, Mr. Dior, winds up dead as well. About 4 months later, Lorenzo's best friend in April 2007, Javante died. And throughout 2007, we began to see more people die, and we realized that these are all house ball members. In 2008, more in 2009, and the trend was not only with the ballroom members, most of them was under 30. And we had to, again, ritualize taking care of these folk who had no money to bury, of course, no insurance. Families oftentimes not as involved in these folks' lives. And so it just became such a ritual thing having to do this, and continues today. And so I think this relationship, being on intimate terms with death for the house ball community, has made community have to be creative around taking care of each other when folks are passing along. So yeah, we've been blessed enough to have collaborative relationships with people like Bishop Yvette Flunder and Pastor Bishop Vanessa Brown in New York City, who's opened their churches up for us to be able to have funeral services. And there are a host of community-based organizations who have, as of late, been able to be collaborative in that effort. But it still exists, and it exists under the eyes and under the guise of larger communities, and still absolutely no outcry. And this is why, last thing I'll say this is why, to go back to what Jennifer said around the need for us to continue to privilege the lives of Black and brown trans women, and at the same time, we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We cannot, we have to reenact sort of the discussion around these young Black Latino gay men who continue to increasingly become HIV positive and who are being brutalized not only around other sort of formations of death, but also in relationship to the crystal epidemic who are taking these young Black Latino gay men out of here.
Michael, can I ask you to take one more step with this, and maybe just sort of share something that has been discussed, I know, a number of times over the past few years, which is the way in which the runway itself, in a certain sense, becomes a theological space, a place of mourning, but particularly, literally in vogue, dying and resurrecting. The way in which you've given a sort of reading of the performance itself, the community gathered and witnessing people dropping and then rising?
You know, I'm a graduate of Union Theological Seminary and a student of womanist theology. And one of my favorite people in this universe is Dr. Ebony Marshall Terman, and who is a woman of scholarship at Yale. And she actually sort of coined this language around sort of what they call folk out of the community called the death drop dip, but it's called the Makaela dip. This notion of a person falling to the floor and rising up was almost in relationship to the crucifixion of Christ and having to resurrect. I oftentimes problematize it. I theologically problematize the resurrection story, the crucified and resurrection story versus the social justice story of Jesus, because what it does is that it oftentimes for most marginalized communities, particularly Black women, it then says that suffering is redemptive and that your reward is when you're resurrected. And so as you continue to see in our community, that has been sort of the case. You know, you think about what Benji talked about earlier and Jennifer talked about earlier, continues to happen to Black and brown trans women, continue to beat and brutalize in many ways and being told that that is part of the life of a trans person. That is the life that you are to expect. And so that is what we call redemptive suffering, and that you do it. You perform for the elation of all of us, and that is your reward. You know, when I was younger, I remember going to, I oftentimes problematize the RuPaul Drag Race, right? That is oftentimes shown in sort of a white gay lens, a white queer lens. And then when I was younger, drag performances were always oftentimes by trans women. We call them drag performances because we had no category called trans then, and we called trans women drag queens. And these performances were usually mostly on a Sunday. And so Sunday, of course, historically is a day that in many ways we were systematically pushed out of church. And so the club became our church. And the trans woman performing became like the Black woman with a big voice we went to see every Sunday. And I call it a hermeneutic of the body, right? A way to use the body to contextualize joy and pain and desire, right? And so for us going there, it was our own elation. But what we failed to recognize in our own patriarchy is that what we allow trans women to be is just a spectacle. Here is sort of the crucifixion, that you use your body as to crucify for our elation, and then when the lights are over, we're not interested in your full humanity. We're not interested in how you're eating. We're not interested in where you're going after that. So.
And we are going to have to leave it right there with our conversation. I am sure that everybody who is with us knows that in a certain sense, we have only just begun. And we hope, though, that we have laid the foundations for many conversations that you may have with yourself and with your communities in the days to come. I'm going to hand it over to Andy to close out our gathering tonight.
Thank you, Robert, for handling this so gracefully this evening. I agree with you. We have laid the foundation for more of these conversations. I hope our speakers tonight will consider coming back and joining us. Zubin, would you be able to share the slide deck at this point? Again, a round of applause to Michael Robertson, Robert Sember, Dr. Ayanna Christian, Dr. Marlon Bailey, Benji Hart. I'm going to call you doctor also. You're all doctors to me. And Dr. Jennifer Lee. You're wonderful. I want to launch while I'm yapping on about other things. I'm going to post this second poll here. I hope you can see it. Please take the time to fill it out. Again, it's really important for us to gather this information. I want to tell you about this forum that's coming up on June 25th. I hope you'll be able to join us. This is sort of a summation of this particular sub-series of Reimagine. I hope our speakers will join us that evening. We'd like to hear what you thought of it and what you'd like to see programmed in the future. So please register for that. Misha, if you can put that link in the chat, that would be great. And next slide, please, Zubin. We have upcoming experiences at Reimagine all during the month of June. They're from our community of collaborators. These folks have organized these events using our platform. Feel free to contact me. You can share the next slide, Zubin, about getting involved in Reimagine, hosting an event, making a donation, whatever you like. Andy at letsreimagine.org. And we are done for the evening. If, again, you guys are brilliant and beautiful. Thank you so much. And I hope to see some of you at the forum. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.